All right. Well, hello all. Welcome to Exploring the Text and World of Bernarda Alba, Scholars Talk. We gather here today in preparation for the Penn State School of Theater's upcoming production of Bernarda Alba. American musical theater composer and lyricist Michael John LaChiusa adapted Federico Garcia Lorca's 1936 play, The House of Bernarda, into America's native art form and a musical in 2006. And the School of Theater's production of LaChiusa's Bernarda Alba is directed and choreographed by Chris Campbell, a second-year MFA musical theater directing candidate. I'm dramaturg for the production, and I will be moderating this conversation today. We are joined by three wonderful guests from the university. Our first is Dr. Juan Udaondo Alegre, who is an assistant professor of Spanish at Penn State University. His research focuses on the intersection of medieval and early modern Spanish literature, philosophy, science, and culture. He examines his processes of translation and the reception of Muslim, Jewish, and classical traditions. His first book, The Spanish Hermes, Wisdom Traditions in Alfonso and Learned General Estoria, will be published by Boydell and Brewer later this year. In addition to this, he has written on Spanish Golden Age and contemporary theater and playwrights like Lope de Vega, Calderón de la Barca, and Jardiel Poncela. He also has an extensive background in stage theater, having directed and acted in numerous university and professional productions of some of the most important playwrights from Spain and around the world. Hello, Juan.
Hello.
Hello. Our second guest is Dr. Jonathan Ebern, who is a professor of comparative literature, English, and French and Francophone studies at Penn State. He is the author of several books, including Exploded Views, Speculative Form, and the Labor of Inquiry, forthcoming from the University of Minnesota Press. His 2018 book, Outsider Theory, Intellectual Histories of Unorthodox Ideas, received the 2020 James Russell Lowell Prize from the Modern Language Association. And his first book, Surrealism and the Art of Cinema, was published in 2008. He's also the co-editor of 6 other books. He's a founding co-editor with Amy J. Elias and former editor-in-chief of the award-winning Aesop/Journal, and founder and acting president of ISSS, the International Society for the Study of Surrealism. He is also part of the team launching a new nonprofit bookstore and culture space in central Pennsylvania called The Print Factory. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Our third guest is Dr. Scott Burnett, an assistant professor of African Studies and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Penn State. His research focuses on 2 main areas: the reproduction of social inequality in environmentalist discourse and critical studies of masculinism in the white supremacist alt-right online. His grounding is in critical discourse studies, critical race theory, and gender studies. He is the author of White Belongings, Race, Land, and Property in Post-Apartheid South Africa, and of numerous single and co-authored articles in journals, including Men and Masculinities, Sexualities, Critical Discourse Studies, Discourse, Context in Media, ACME, and Environment and Planning E, Nature and Science, Space. From spring 2024 to fall 2025, he will be the principal investigator of a Mellon Foundation-funded Sawyer seminar series entitled Birthing the Nation, Sex, Gender, and Reproduction in Ethno-Nationalist Imaginaries. His second book, Analyzing Environmental Discourse, A Critical Approach, is contacted with Bloomsbury Academic Press. Hello, Scott.
Hi.
So we're so grateful to have you three here for conversation today. 2 days ago, the 4 of us visited the rehearsal room for Bernarda Alba and saw a run of the musical. So today's conversation is a chance for our 3 scholars to respond to the work in progress, and any feedback they have will be helpful for the artists who are working on the production as we head into performances. Today's conversation also serves as a piece of asynchronous dramaturgical content that audiences of Bernarda can watch before or after the show as a way of supplementing their experience of the production. We aim to gather your perspectives from your various departments and specialties: Spanish drama, European surrealism, reproductive justice, on Lorca's play, on LaChiusa's musical adaptation, and on Penn State's ongoing production of the musical, so that we can better understand the text and the world of the story. So without further ado, let's begin with Lorca's play. Let me begin by asking Juan, can you explain to me some of what influenced and inspired Lorca's literary works during his lifetime, both his poems and his later dramatic works? What was the world that Lorca was living in? How did the society impact his writing?
Yeah, so Lorca was a very learned person. So he had like a extensive education and background, and he, drank for many sources. But I think the most characteristic feature of Lorca's literature, and specifically La Casa de Bernarda Alba, is that he put together tradition and avant-garde, and that's extremely important. So there is a lot of tradition because he's talking about the traditional society, clearly. No? And in this play and in most of his works there are something about the Spanish and Andalusian traditional society, the good and the bad things. And he also has like a tradition when he's incorporating the classical tragedy, which he loved because the House of Bernarda Alba is a tragedy. You know, it's like one of it's a perfect tragedy in as literature theory talks about. And he also was influenced by the Golden Age Spanish theater, which is the theater of Spain in the 17th century, so the same time as Shakespeare, but in Spain. And he loved that, and actually he worked for the Spanish government of the Republic to bring the classical theater to the little villages who didn't have access to culture. That was a very important cultural endeavor at that time. And he also is influenced by the avant-garde. So, and we can see this in the House of Bernarda Alba, in the surrealist symbols, the the wars, everything. And he was part of one of the literature generation of that moment, which was the generation of the 27, which practically did the same, you know, put together tradition and avant-garde at the same time. So they talked about the golden age poets and everything, but at the same time they incorporated the avant-garde improvements in the literature of the period. Yeah.
Mhm. I really, one thing I really appreciate about hearing about Lorca's biography is that he did engage in like being a part of university theater. That was one of the things he did.
Yes.
And I feel like we are carrying on his legacy a little bit by engaging with this project.
Yes, he
So,
has a famous theater company at the university called La Barraca,
mhm,
and he put professional actors and students and everybody just to make theater and to bring theater to the little villages in Spain and all over, so in places that maybe no professional company was ever. So he brought theater there. So that was great.
And what is Lorca's legacy after his lifetime? I'm thinking about after he passed, his works were censored during the Franco regime, but also what might be his legacy in scholarship and in theater in the 21st century. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Lorca is the one of the most, if not the most, studied writers of the 20th century Spain, both in Spain and in the United States. Which probably when I came here like 30 years ago, I realized that Lorca was like a big figure. So everybody was talking about him. There are a lot of bibliography, and despite that, there are still aspects of his production of his opera to be studied. So he's so interesting, and he had so that's terrible. He had a very short life. He died when he was like 36, 37, and he was so young. So he wasn't able to to put to fruition all his ideas, all his everything. Yeah, but he's like still, and he also you can see also his productions in states like we are gonna
Mhm.
see here next week, which is great, and in New York and in Los Angeles or so, everywhere. And in Spain, every year there are stage productions of many of his plays, which is great.
Mhm. And Jonathan and Scott, what has been your experience with Lorca, if any, so far? What is your impression?
So just to add, I think that one of the most striking aspects of watching the rehearsal is how much it brings into relief the fact that this is a play that was released, it was first produced posthumously after
Yeah, yeah,
Lorca's murder by the fascist regime under Franco very early, and I think that has been a huge part of the reception of Lorca in general as a kind of as a martyr, as a gay icon, as somebody who died for his beliefs, who died for his sexuality, and it really brings out in the shape of the tragedy, which Juan mentioned is a form that Lorca really enjoyed, but it's the whereas in Greek tragedy you might say the gods or fates are in the background, and here one sees the hand of a regime or the hands of institutions of patriarchy, institutions of the church, institutions of a right-wing regime. And I think that's really striking, the way which this play, which was written just 2 months before he was murdered, really bears that out, that you can see these forces at work. And so that's something that really struck me about the production as well.
Mm-hmm. The literary history of this play is something that's very interesting. Sometimes when I delve into history, I'm not sure how important it'll be, but the revisionist or like the retrospective analysis of this play, knowing Lorca's death is very important to how we understand the play. So yeah, I really see that. Scott, any ideas, any thoughts?
I'm not at all a literary scholar, so my ideas of Lorca are very much sort of received from the general culture. But my general impressions after seeing the rehearsal a couple of days ago is that for me there's such a powerful feeling that's created with an all-woman cast, and what he's trying to do with these very strong, very interesting women, and the commentary that that allows him to make on patriarchy, capitalism, sort of feudal land holding, and all the other things that are commented on in the play. And it reminded me, I know this is probably a bit sort of facile, but it reminded me of the way that Pedro Almodovar represents women in cinema in the 80s and 90s, that it becomes, you know, also very powerful women who are always at the center, but they're at the center in a very subversive way. So another sort of gay auteur who's using these very powerful female characters to do a similar thing socially, to sort of chip away at patriarchy, but with very, very different approaches to representation. So I found that incredibly interesting.
Mm-hmm. And we see something very interesting and like a parallel between Lorca and LaChiusa, who adapted Lorca's play into the musical. They're both writers who are very interested in the stories of women. A lot of their works center women as the central protagonists. So as we move into thinking about not only the play but the musical, may I ask your thoughts generally for, well, first of all, who knows Lorca's play beforehand? I know Juan definitely knows. Jonathan, do you know Lorca's play? Well,
I
then
did not work with this play before. No, this is my first time reading it and experiencing it.
this is my this whole project has been one of my first times too with that. I've been very much enjoying it. Juan, may I ask, as someone who's worked on Lorca's play before, you worked on a production of La Casa de Bernarda Alba. How do you perceive LaChiusa's adaptation of the story of the musical? I'm thinking that we have like two levels of mediation here. One, the translation from Spanish to English, and one, this adaptation from a straight play to a musical theater. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there are many interesting and good things in the production. So I like the fusion of the music, you know, between the Spanish traditional music from Andalusia in the south of Spain, like flamenco, and also the music for the, you know, the American style musical. But it's very well done, so it's great. So the beginning of the play is powerful, you know, and all the Spanish tradition is there, and it's well done, and you know, and I really enjoy that. And also it's very interesting because Lorca was a musician himself, you know, so he was primarily a poet and a writer, but he knows how to play the guitar, and he famously played guitar in the meetings with his friends, and he was a very loved person by everybody. He played guitar. So when he's writing poetry, when he's writing theater, so there is something musical about the words used. And even though this play is not in verse, as many other of his plays or his poetry, still the music is there, the lyrics are there. So maybe that can't be translated, you know, as poetry. But when you put music into the production, you are like making up a little bit. Yeah, and I think it's working. It's working very well, you know. So that's one of the things I really love, you know. And still, of course, some other things, the symbols, the metaphors, that kind of is still there, you know. Everything. I know the play very well, and all the essential, all the you can see this in this production.
I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that we really enjoy has been thinking of the musical as like the manifestation of Lorca's adolescent dreams, and that he wanted to be like a pianist, a musician before he went into literary work. So we've been really thinking about that as a carrying out of his dreams. What is your idea on how the musical is different from the play? As someone who's familiar with the play a lot, what things strike you about the musical that make it a different, or either expanding on the message of the play, or a market adaptation, not just a musical form, but like a different message, if there is any?
Well, I don't know. Maybe some of the themes, some of the topics of the play are read or are received in a different way nowadays, especially because it is a play about women, about the rights of women, about the frustration of women, the repression, everything is theirs, So he wanted, on the one hand, he wanted to do something universal, like a tragedy, but by talking about very specific of the society of the south of Spain, he wanted to do something universal that could talk to people all over the the world and in the future. And he was very aware of that, and he was very explicit about his aims, about what he wanted to do with his theater, which is great. And I think you got it, So what he wanted to do with his theater and with his play is there in the production.
Mhm.
Yeah. So and there is also like a very powerful cast of young women in the in the production, which I loved, and all the actresses are, they have been very well assigned to the roles in the play. So, and since I was working on theater for many years, I know that that's very important. That the specific actress is in the correct role, and that works great. So the actresses are awesome.
I think so too. I really appreciate especially how the cast has worked on like individualizing the different roles of the daughters and the servants. They're
Yes.
all then they're stock role. They are like they have roles. They're characters with roles in society and in the household, but they also have very different individual characterizations.
Yes, and also for Lorca, it was very important creating this tragedy. That
Mhm.
in the traditional tragedy, there is like one tragic hero, Oedipus but here there are many of them, So all the women are the heroes of this tragedy. So how women react um, to this patriarchy, to this oppression, to this sexual frustration in different ages, because there are women of different ages, so that Adela is the youngest, who is 20, and Angustias is 40, and Bernarda Alba is 60, and his crazy mother is 80, So there is different ages, and that's very, well
Mhm.
for. And also there are different personalities in the five daughters of Bernarda Alba. There are one which is more naive, and then Adela is like a rebel, So is that different? So and that's perfect, and that's very well reflected in the cast of the play.
Mhm. One of the things I've been curious about is just your impression on a university putting on this production, in the sense that it is a cast that has a very large age range. And I was wondering maybe your thoughts as knowing the play, knowing that these are characters of different ages, but seeing them mostly played by people of the same age. Did you have any thoughts on that? How does
Yeah, no,
that
but
relate to you?
that works well.
Okay.
For instance, the actress performing Bernarda Alba, she's like a powerful actress. So she's there. She's like a impressive presence in in the stage. And that works very well. And then the the other actress who is doing the mother of Bernarda Alba, who is supposed to be an old woman. Okay, maybe she's a bit older than the rest of the cast, and she's like more experienced. So he can do like a lot of things, and that's the type of actress and character that probably Lorca would like, because he's like doing that so well. And also all the rest of the actresses are perfectly well in their roles.
Mhm. Noted. Um, No, I appreciate that. I think it's very funny in the School of Theater. We have Milena Ramirez who's playing Maria Josefa, and I feel like a couple times in the past 2 years, when it comes to playing grandmother characters, the School of Theater pulls in faculty to do that, and I think that's a little bit funny because Maria Josefa is like 86 years old, and Milena is very young. But it's
Yes.
happened multiple times, and it's very entertaining to me. In adapting these stories about generations of family, things like Into the Woods, and we did Tartuffe into things that college age people can play. Um, Yes. So another question I had was that we were talking about Lorca being a part of the generation of 27, a group of poets that rose in Spanish circles. They shared a desire to work on avant-garde art and poetry. Juan, you mentioned that Lorca and his works, they are like a synthesis of Spanish folklore, spoke classical literature and also European avant-garde movements like surrealism. Two questions for the group are, how does this Lorca's play translate from that form into this very expressive form of American musical theater in this adaptation? They're two different aesthetic art styles in some ways. Jonathan, do you have any ideas?
Certainly. Two points come to mind, and I saw that Juan was going to speak as well. But the 2 points that come to mind are both based on the notion that avant-garde does not mean novelty always. I think that one of the things about the experimentalism ascribed to 20th century avant-garde movements is can really be seen in what the work of art is doing, what the work of art is for. And what does it bring? What does it bring in? What does it gather together? So in translating Lorca's play into an American musical, one of the things that really comes to light is the hybrid nature of the American musical form, which is to say, it too is bringing together different traditions, African American music, the white appropriation of African American music. In vaudeville and music hall, as well as European concert music, is really all coming together in that format, which is, and the nature of its Americanness, I think, has a lot to do with the history of appropriation and of collecting and gathering, again, for various purposes and reasons. So that's something that Lorca's own interest in form, as Juan has already been talking about, was invested in, and I think it's really interesting to see that at work in the nature of the U.S. musical. And I feel like the hybridity of the musical forms in the play that we're watching really bears that out in self-aware ways, not just in blindly or unself-consciously appropriating, but really being aware of its source materials. So that's one observation, and the second has to do with what I see is some of the chiming between the work of Lorca and the work of his friends Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel, which has to do with the arresting image. Juan called it the heavy symbol. In the film that made Dali and Buñuel famous in Paris, The Andalusian Dog, there's this unbelievably striking image of a young man approaching a lover and bearing behind him, pulling a rope behind which is attached this rather absurd collection of things. But there's a priest and a piano and a rotting donkey all chained together. And these are all obsessional images for Dali that really come back in his work. But this idea of this really elaborate, difficult, and rather ugly gesture, suggesting all that is borne out, right, as this man approaches a lover, and sort of all that love gesture sort of carries with it, really is literalized in that image. And I feel that some of the most arresting elements of this tragedy, mind you, many of which happen off stage, right? This horrible scene at the end of the dogs, unearthing the murdered infant, right? I mean, that's happening off stage according to the classical rules of tragedy, or Aristotelian rules of tragedy, to have the supreme amounts of violence appear off stage. Nonetheless, has that really difficult condensation of imagery as part of it. And so this idea of that really powerful, heavily symbolic, arresting image strikes me as another commonality there. And I think that the musical form and some of the beautiful choreography is bringing that arresting nature on stage, not to sort of betray the classical rules of tragedy, but rather to integrate that striking nature within the full body of the drama.
I appreciate that, especially the blending, like the appreciation of this blending of tradition and genre. I'm reminded once again that Bernarda Alba is not, it's a revival, but it's one of those musicals that was not, like, it was not on Broadway, it was off Broadway. It hasn't had any major revival since then. It's a very stark musical as opposed to a lot of, and its depiction, it's a very blank white walls and all that, which is different than a lot of the maybe maximalist sort of over the top natures of some types of Broadway musicals. So I'm trying to see how this kind of translates. Yes, Juan, your thoughts on the musical adaptation as a choice form of this play?
No, as I said, it works very well. No?
Okay.
It works very well, and that's in the essence of the play as well. So Lorca used music in most of his plays, but not in the last ones, which is maybe because he wanted to emphasize certain things or whatever. But the music is still there in the original Spanish play, in the language, in the symbols, in the in the structure of the play, and how some words repeat all over the play, and stuff. So the music is, and I think the musical form works great in this way.
Mm-hmm. Scott, your thoughts? You seem like you had a thought.
Well, I mean, one of the things about the musical form that's also important is that it does update it to a certain extent, right? It makes it, when this was first done in 2006, in translating it into a form, it kind of renovates it in some way, or renews at least, makes the story come to life in a different way for a new audience. And I think that it's a very relevant story, even though the kind of the social norms of Andalusia might not be kind of immediately sort of part of our world. I think that the themes are very powerfully relevant. The idea that women are have such power in upholding patriarchy and in tearing it down.
Mm-hmm.
That's unfortunately, that's still an incredibly relevant thing to be thinking about. So patterns of complicity and collaboration. So I think that the fact that it is in that musical form, which is both entertaining and beautiful, as my colleagues have pointed out, like it packages it in a way that a 21st century audience has some kind of connection to. I've seen, I was sort of doing a bit of Googling about other productions of this play, and I saw that there was one in Spain a few years ago where it was like, sort of the more or less the Lorca script, but they had men everywhere, naked men sort of standing on plinths, to kind of, symbolize the power of these, the power and the vulnerability of these dead and absent male figures. I suppose that's one way that you can kind of get a 21st century audience into the theater, is with a bit of nudity, with a bit of kind of risk taking. But I think the musical form is a very, very clever way to do it, because it keeps the audience following every move. It helps to build these very well-defined, as Juan pointed out, well-defined characters that really have their own kind of roles to play in the tragedy as it unfolds. So I think it's a very good choice.
Yeah, what I have seen is adaptations only with dance, no words, in Spain. Yeah, Lorca. And there are wonderful dance also in this play, in this production, and the actresses are, so skilled, in dancing, singing, moving, acting. So that's awesome. And since I was doing theater in Spain for so many years, I really like how, young American actresses and actors, so they do everything well. So they can dance, they can play, they can act, they can recite, they can, that's wonderful. They can sing.
Mm-hmm. And to like dwell on this point exactly, on what are your thoughts, for the group, on the what is like unfamiliar about the story and translating it between a Spanish rural town in the early 20th century and between now in America and the 21st century as we are experiencing it? What is unfamiliar about the story for modern audiences, and what is very similar? I think we started touching upon some of the themes that are similar, the oppression of women being something that women upheld themselves. Any other thoughts from the group on that subject?
Well, I'll just sort of kick off. I think when I first was talking about the play, I sort of corrected myself. I said, you know, critique of capitalism. And then I was like, well, it was kind of feudal landholding patterns or something. There's that sort of translation that I think is there. So it's relevant to think about the way that money and wealth moves within relationships, right? So it's very relevant to think about the class dynamics of you know the formation of relationships of you know men and women in this particular instance. It may be, you know, I think the audience comes to this knowing something about the kind of those old patterns of, you know, inheritance of land and all of those problems, which of course Lorca is very interested in critiquing. That, you know, might not be exactly what we're interested in critiquing in the 21st century, but there's certainly a lot to be said there about the way that privilege is heritable, and the way that you know, when we think about sex and forming families and those things, that there are material concerns that underlie those, that we don't just kind of go out into the world as sort of these, you know, free individuals and think, oh, I'm going to fall in love, you know, I'll find my you know, my soulmate or whatever, and actually, you know, it ends up being someone of, you know, more or less your education level, more or less your wealth, you know, in more or less the same social circles, you know, time and time again. So that was sort of one aspect that I thought was interesting in terms of the translation.
We've been thinking a lot about the active versus passive, the idea of like desiring versus to be desired, or having free will versus being compelled to do something. So I appreciate that thing of how social control, social considerations impact actions and desires. Yes,
Yeah,
Jonathan?
one of the things that struck me in this production was that sometimes Bernarda Alba, the mother, is like commanding her daughters like soldiers, like in the military. And my reflection was, okay, maybe this is like a North American reading of power, because they, okay, you are released, you move, and sometimes they are like, you know, in perfect lines like soldiers, you know. So that for me that was yeah, like a good interpretation, you know, to the
Yeah, it seems like a commentary on America's role in like global militarism as well. Not just like our image of what a dictatorship might look like in our current role. I see that.
Yes.
Yes, Jonathan?
Well, to return to something that Scott was saying, there's something that could appear antiquated about the preservation of virginity, right? And I think that the framework that this production renders that in has to do with reproductive rights. And that is, of course, very topical and has so much to do with the preservation of power. And I think that the notion that reproduction, that social reproduction, signifies not only the control of the bodies who are doing that labor, which is to say, workers in the home, women, mothers, right, potential mothers, seeing everything in that lens or casting everything in that lens is one form of social reproduction. The fact that it's also bound up in the way that property gets passed on, I think, is an optic that's really important and invaluable, and that this production brings, this play also brings to bear, lest that seem like an old-fashioned issue. And as Scott suggested, it's really very much not. And likewise, as one said, it's very much not in multiple ways, right? In terms of the military protection of you know, stolen land or of appropriated land or passed on land, as well as the familial sort of protection of sameness. I think both aspects of this kind of social reproduction are very much on the table today, and very much in the purview of this production. So that's a really impressive aspect of it.
The fact that it's so powerfully centered around absent men but present women, who are they you know, thinking about this whole thing of, you know, whether we're kind of in control or whether we are caught up in discourses that circulate. There's a lot of that tension there. Like there's a lot of tension between whether we are merely the products of patriarchy and whether the women in the house of Alba are just kind of puppets of the dead men, you know, or puppets of the landholding pattern, puppets of you know, some larger institution, the Catholic Church, or you know, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of play there, in terms of, you know, the extent to which their complicity is intentional, or actually just the force of habit, and you know, the kind of the subject position that they have been raised in, that they are sort of compelled to reproduce. So in those moments there between the generations and between the sisters, of course, we see moments where the social reproduction that Jonathan's talking about might be interrupted, where we get those sort of hints of, you know, maybe we're not going to just repeat the cycle again. Maybe there will be something new. Of course, the fact that it's a tragedy, which, you know, it works great as a story, but the fact that the most subversive, rebellious character doesn't survive the play, spoiler alert, you know, does undermine that a little bit. But maybe there is some sort of, you know, glimmers of hope there from some of her sisters.
We've been thinking about Adela's suicide and death at the end as a way of her achieving bodily autonomy in a way. It's tragic, but that's the way she's able to in this society, in this world. Juan, you seem like you had thoughts.
Yeah, no, so those are very interesting ideas. So one is that the emphasis on virginity, which is very specific of the traditional Spanish theater, the honor that women had to be chaste, you know, and that's really important because actually the name Alba of Bernarda Alba, Alba can mean chastity, you know, or chaste,
Yeah,
in a way. So that's the symbol, and also and that's something that can't be translated. But also the names of the daughters have also like meaning in Spanish, you know, in the Spanish and sometimes in Latin when they are there. And Lorca was very aware of that, you know, all of the names of the play, because he loved that. He loved the music of the names, but also the etymological meaning or whatever. And that's it. And that's very traditional. And so it's and when the play closes, you know, so Bernarda Alba is very interested. No, she died as a virgin, so that's the most important thing, you know. So that's one of the last words, but the very last word is silence. You know, that's the first and the last word of the play are silence. You know, so it's like just shut up. You know, this has to continue. And Bernarda Alba is a woman who is interested in preserve the power of men. And he says that in very specific moments of the play. And we still can see that now in modern politics in the United States. There's some
absolutely.
That sometimes they are the most interested in preserve the power of men, and that's very striking. But Lorca was interested in, you know, in showing that.
Because in showing just how central women are to reproducing patriarchy and how important that complicity is, and how much work and how much pain and sweat goes into making patriarchy work, the implication is there. Stop doing that work and patriarchy is less powerful, right?
Yes.
Stop, you know, hurting yourself, hurting those around you, and be part of something different. It's potentially such a liberating idea. But I do think that audiences at you know, in central Pennsylvania in the 21st century will know, you know, that there are still young women in the United States who are encouraged to take vows of chastity, who go to purity balls, who's, you know, there's an example of one where like your father is your boyfriend and you go to the prom with your father. And so these ideas about purity and the importance of the central male figure as kind of the holder of family honor in terms of Christianity or whatever it might be, are still very much with us today. And in far right politics, we're seeing the development of this whole idea of the trad wife, you know, the woman who goes back to those, you know, very Bernarda Alba type ideas about, you know, what a woman should be and, you know, what her role is. in the kitchen and in the marriage bed, and as a reproducer of the race, as going back to tradition and going back to those cycles. So it's a very potent, as Juan says, it's a very potent social force in today's United States and elsewhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. We've been thinking a lot about in the production about the 2006 moment with how the Bush administration was like canceling reproductive education in schools and that, and then now to 2024 the lots of legislation against reproductive rights similarly is happening at the same time. So we see a lot of parallels between the inception of the musical and our current production revival of it. Speaking to this idea of as we like think about this idea of sexuality especially a lot, one of the things that we are interested in this musical is that LaChiusa's musical makes even more explicit this blurry line between consent and violation that we kind of see hinted at Lorca's play. For example, in LaChiusa's musical, we hear about how Paca La Rosetta is carried off by a band of men to the olive grove. Poncela says that she didn't object. They say she didn't object. We also hear in the music how Adela wants Pepe to stop and not to stop. What do you all make of the women of this musical being at times agent or victim of their sexuality in society?
Yeah, I think there was something very striking that actually in the adaptation of LaChiusa, he suppressed some lines of Lorca, which says that when they took Paca La Rosetta to the olives and that she came back happily with flowers in his hair. And those lines are not in this adaptation, maybe because he wanted to emphasize the rape aspect of that, which is correct, so. Yeah, and also some of the daughters, like they feel the desire for men, but they also fear men, and that's also there, in this adaptation in English, which is true, that's on the one hand, that's the body and the desire and everything, but on the other hand, the society is not pleasant for women, and they know that they are danger, in the relation with men, so all things are in the perfectly reflected in the adaptation.
I wondered if there wasn't some projection there of because it's refreshing to see an early 20th century text that celebrates female desire and women's sexuality, and that is like not afraid to talk all these liquid images about the river and the sea, and the orgasm scene, like there's so much of that, and it's very refreshing to see. But at the same time, Lorca's is what we would today call a cis white guy, maybe he thinks it'd be cool to be taken to the orchard by a group of strapping young men, and have fun with them, because he's not maybe threatened in the same way by sexual violence.
Yeah, but he uses the same symbols for women desire that for homosexuals desire in another place, which the horse. There is a famous play, El Público, the public, of Lorca, which the gay aspect is very strong, and he uses very similar symbols as in this play.
The stallion that breaks the door.
yes, that's always the horse,
The monstrous nature, right, of these scenes, I think, and the idea that that we have, again, I want to compare the orchard scene in a sense to the final scene and to the stallion scene, right? I mean, they're every aspect of anything resembling sexuality, anything resembling the non-relation, or the kind of the relationship or non-relationship between men and women is monstrous, and that something that I think is tinged with violence in ways that I find very striking without parsing them out. So like it both maybe not, but also always is a rape scene. The idea of being taken away, or being pulled away by force, even abducted, right? Thinking about that traditionally as named rape too. And it makes me question, this is a detour, but it makes me question the sort of the question of Bernarda Alba herself as a kind of monstrous figure, and how to think about the sort of monstrous mother figure. There are two plays that come to mind that are kind of in conversation with this one in my mind, and I'll just gloss them really quickly. One is a Polish naturalist play. It was kind of a experimental play for its time, insofar as it's really about socialist vision of family life in this kind of way. And it's called the Morality of Mrs. Dolska, and likewise about this sort of matriarchal figure enacting all of this violence in order to keep the respectability of the family intact at the expense of the actual humanity of the people involved.
Mhm.
And really thinking that as a kind of call to solidarity, as we've already heard a little bit. So that's kind of one monstrous mother, you might say. The other figure is Medea, the classical tragic figure who murders her own children. And I feel like that's haunting this story in a way too. Um, and there are different ways of looking at that act, right? This horrible act. I mean, what can be worse than that, you might say, in some ways, but it's also a kind of expression of incredible betrayal, of incredible desire, and of incredible anger, right? So the idea that the play does things, expresses things that are really hard to say otherwise, I think is really charged in these scenes of monstrosity. And I think it's really important not to sort of single out Bernarda Alba as like the singular sort of antagonist in the play, right? But rather sort of the person who represents literally the house that she is keeping in order.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And one of the things I appreciate, and I'm thinking especially as the musical adapts the title from the House of Bernarda Alba, a place to Bernarda Alba herself.
Mm.
And that sort of shift in focus in some ways between the two. Yes. And thinking about this idea of like desire as a source of danger, one of the things that our production was interested in was connecting the musical to, or our production of the musical to, contemporary conversations in activism and scholarship. One of the things we've been using as a touch point is Jane Ward's 2020 book, The Tragedy of Heterosexuality, which talks about the double bind of heterosexuality for women as something that is both danger and desire. So opening that question up a little to everyone's different specialties and subject areas, where do you see a lot of the choice in the sort of social act and political choice of an artistic choice of revival is the choice in the very place to revive this one specific title at this moment in time. So speaking about this moment in time, how does this work, this musical, speak to the current conversations, activism, and scholarship that y'all are seeing in other places in your work, in your worlds?
Well, if we can maybe just speak a little bit about the episode of the infanticide. Of course, there are feminist philosophers who would argue that the period during which one can abort a pregnancy should be extended after the moment of birth. So maybe that's the way that that was what was available to this young woman. She didn't have another option, so the only way to exercise that choice that she ultimately didn't have was the infanticide. But the important thing I think that this play shows so clearly, and that resonates in the current moment, is that there's this appearance that of decency, of morality, of upholding these really important traditions, and that the role of the good mother or the good wife or whatever it might be are these kind of nice things, these homely, comfy things. And I think there's a real political project behind that at the moment that's trying to make that clear. I mean, the previous election, well, no, sorry, 2 elections ago, there was a candidate who happened to be a woman who was, constantly attacked on, not really being a nice woman, not really being the model of, a comfy, cozy wife that you need to be if you want to get any political power in this country. So that what that shows is that what the play shows is that everything that is potentially good, everything that love, good sex, all of those longings for food, for air, for water, for the good things in life, are turned into a nightmare, are turned into pain and abjection. And this image of the dog bringing the dead infant back to the door of the house, like that the cycle comes back, that you can try to kind of pretend that everything is fine on the surface, that this is decent, that we're all good, but it's going to come back and it's going to harm you. It's something that directly is violating and working violence on women, as much as they many of them seek to uphold it. So it's an absolute indictment of patriarchy and men, but showing us that the men don't need to be present for us to repeat those cycles of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the implicit things in the play is that Adela is pregnant by Pepe Romano at the end. And that's the reason why when she listens to the story of the newborn kid and how the mother was like killed by the rest of the people and the sisters, they agree with that, with the punishment, but not Adela. Adela is the only one suffering. Why? Because maybe she would have to take that choice to kill his own child, to get like kind of an abortion. And she knows that because at that time, having a child without the marriage was like social exclusion, especially in the villages, was a terrible punishment. So she doesn't have that choice. If he takes the choice of kill his newborn baby, she's gonna be killed and punished as well. That's what was there in the play, and that's very well done in this production too. How she's suffering, whereas the rest of the sisters and Bernarda Alba and the servant all are insensitive, and even like happy that the sin has been punished. Yeah.
Jonathan, did I see?
I'm just, I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking, how conscious or how deliberate this is. This is a play written about patriarchy by a queer but cis white man that has been adapted by or set to music by a man, and you've gathered together three male-identifying professors to talk about the way that the play is functioning, and I'm really intrigued at that because the cast is all women. The director is male identifying, and so I'm really interested in sort of the order of reproduction that's happening on the level of staging this tragedy, right? And I think it's interesting that on one hand to think about gender, right, as a topic that well, literally everybody has, right? Like everybody has a gender and everybody has some kind of sexual expression, whether they are complicit with it or not, or people are sexualized against their own wills even. So thinking about, who's doing the adaptation, who's doing the discussion, I think is a really interesting question. So if you don't mind me asking you, was it a conscious decision to have this conversation involve three male identifying faculty members?
This was just how the things rolled in the end. I'm very excited. I'm very happy to have you all. Especially, I mean, I really wanted to speak to all of you because of your specialties, what you're interested in, because of your interest in the play, especially in the musical. So that was just coincidence how that happened. I can speak to.
I have to say that Arushi first talked with one of my colleagues who is like a female, but since she's more specialist in Latin American theater, no, Juan is the person because she's the one who knows about peninsular theater in our department. So that's just chance, So.
And I talked to Dr. Jill Wood first, who then led me to talk to Dr. Burnett. So this is how things worked out. And then Jonathan, I know you, so hello.
Yeah, no, it's not a critique. I think it's actually really interesting, and I'll say also important, right? I mean that again that like that a play about about gender, about sexual violence, about the violence of reproductive sexuality when it is imposed is not like a women's topic or something like this, and that I think that often happens in terms of the way in which I don't know, somehow students move from class to class, or topics seem to be parsed out according to, fields of interest. So I think it's really important that this be the case. So again, it's by no means a critique, just interesting.
Yes.
In my gender studies class, I generally have one or two men, and the rest are women. So it absolutely, so the gender is still seen as something that women do, which is completely ridiculous.
And to speak to the production a bit, we have a lot of there are two men who are writing this play. It was like Lorca and LaChiusa who adapted it. But they are gay men, and a lot of the queer men working on the production are especially drawn to the story about the repression of sexuality. We were thinking about the battle for same-sex marriage in 2006 and ongoing legislation about queer issues at the moment. We've been thinking about the queer identity as part of our interpretation of this play, especially even among the cast, as we've been talking about. The idea that even one might be a queer woman and still have that specter of the male gaze at the back of your head, even if that's not what you desire to do or be at all. So that is part of speaking from the production. That's what a lot of our interest is coming from in as the artists working on the show. Yes. So I think yes.
Sorry, just to also I mean there's a perhaps also, Jonathan says that, it's absolutely not a critique.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
just interested in, did you have that conversation about the men speaking for women, men representing, because I've been mouthing off about, complicity in patriarchy, so much power and so much violence. But there is perhaps a small danger that, men take on the role now of representing what women are doing wrong and what they can do about it in future.
Yes, I think a lot of what we've been getting to is actually really like appreciation for Lorca's perspective on things. What a lot of our team did is we read Lorca's play. We were working on the musical, but we also read the tragedy of heterosexuality, and we were picking out the sort of parallels between modern heterosexuality, like straight women's plight, queer women's plight, in comparison to what the reality Lorca is depicting in the text. So really, we've been leaning into a lot of the resonances we see between this past text and today. So I think, yes, Juan, you have a head thought?
No, I mean, good. Thank you.
Yes. Well, I think we are at time. Are there any lasting thoughts that you have for that you'd like the audiences to know, that you'd like the artists to know on for this production? I'll get a front. All right. Well, thank you so much, Juan, Jonathan, and Scott, for your time, for sharing your perspective and expertise with us. Thank you so much for engaging with the musical and with our production. We on the production team are so very excited to hear your thoughts. I'm excited to share this with everybody, and we are so grateful for you taking the time to do this. To listeners at home, Penn State Center Stage's Spring 2024 production of Bernarda Alba will perform at the Downtown Theater from April 11th to 14th. Evening and matinee tickets are $20, $15 for students. This webinar will be available to ticket holders to watch before and after the run. To those listeners who have just seen the production, thank you so much for your support, and I hope that this has shed some new light on your understanding of the performance. And to those who are going to see the show, wishing you a lovely time at the performance. For now, thank you so much to Juan, Jonathan, and Scott, and wishing a lovely day to everybody. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Arushi, for your thoughtful questions and engagement. And I really also want to extend my thanks to the cast and crew for making us part of this. It's really an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.